Deputy Doherty. Ceann Comhairle agus Bóilm ar núineachta tá Barty an Hospital Nation de Moirachas at Malta ag an rialtas agus an aris leinte ar dú leat aniu. Yn anion yn emnithe trom chwysha fe corynwyl ag gylior ban agus gylior doctory. Fwy ahlon yn hospital gyda yn siw ag niwynsyn y mole ag clia. Tan rialtas ag glianw yn gydihal a lys yn re lias a fe ar an talw ar y doctor yn hospital yn et a fe yn y uniar de. Agus ni yn sio ciel a harabi ar don rialtas gymil pisa inta tewarta da wanagar slainte hogal ar casa da harafa €1 billion ar chalw na mei ar uniaracht ag an state. Minister, I want to raise with you the proposed ownership model of the National Maternity Hospital that's been pursued by the government and by the Minister for Health. And despite serious concerns being voiced by many women and many prominent medics about the relocation of the hospital to the site at St Vincent's in Dublin, the government is relentlessly pursuing the option of leasing the land the hospital will be built on instead of owning it outright. It's very concerning that the Deputy Chairperson of the HSE Board, Professor Deirdre Madden, a leading medical law scholar, and Dr. Sarah McLaughlin, a patient advocate on the board, both dissented from the HSE Board decision to recommend the legal framework. Now, everyone here in this House agrees that a new national maternity hospital needs to be built and operational as soon as possible. But expedience cannot be at the cost of rights in any way. The full range of legally permissible services must be available in the hospital to any qualifying patient. Now, Minister, the minutes of the HSE Board meeting of the 14th of March show that Professor Madden and Dr. McLaughlin expressed concerns at, and I quote, the legal ownership of the site and building and the governance and control of the proposed new maternity hospital. And they felt that these concerns were not adequately addressed in the revised legal framework. It also doesn't make any sense, Minister, that the government is going to build a vital piece of health infrastructure at a likely cost of about €1 billion on land that the state doesn't own. That makes no sense. The Taoiseach said yesterday that the lease will only cost €10 a year, but that doesn't change the fact that the new hospital will have a private landlord. The question must be asked once again, because no answers were forthcoming on this issue yesterday from the Taoiseach. Why can't the Sisters of Charity and St Vincent's simply gift the land to the state? It's a simple question. What's the answer? Why is the government accepting this convoluted, messy ownership model that is stoking unease and stoking worry? What we need is a publicly built maternity hospital on publicly owned land, delivering public healthcare services for women at a standard of excellence. Sinead, that's what's required. This would protect the state's investment. It would address the concerns of so many who fear that a religious dogma could compromise the delivery of healthcare at the hospital. Now, Minister, we understand from media reports that your own colleague, Minister Catherine Martin, among others, has raised concerns about this model at Cabinet, and I believe it is incumbent on you to give a full answer as to why the government continues to pursue a model of ownership that does not enjoy the confidence that it should. And can I ask you personally to outline your position? Are you now satisfied with this model of ownership, despite that the land will not be owned by the state?
Thank you, Deputy Minister, please.
Firstly, my colleague Catherine Martin, we were out yesterday and she was asked these questions, and she rightly said what we decided at Cabinet on Tuesday is that it would be very good for us to have this debate, to actually have full scrutiny, to have full transparency, to have all the legal documents, because there is concerns. People are concerned on all sides and various different parties. And I think it was absolutely right and appropriate for us to make the decision. The Minister of Health will go to the Oireachtas Committee and go and be open answer to every single question, every single possible angle of this to be examined and looked at. And I fully agree with her in that. I also feel, and I believe there's various different medical views, you quoted one medical versus another, but I think the vast majority of the medics and indeed the wide public recognise that the existing situation in the National Maternity Hospital, as good as that is in many ways in terms of medical care, is intolerable. And that we cannot delay. It was still going to take us, but before the end of the decade, even if we decided to go ahead tomorrow, it's unlikely we had the master of that institution in with us yesterday at our parliamentary party meeting saying even if we went ahead tomorrow, it will be 2030 before we see a new hospital in operation in St Vincent's. And I think any further delay bringing that back another 5 or 10 or whatever number of years as we start to look at alternative options would rightly be something of an issue of real controversy. In my own view, the legal documentation and the very structures here show that there will not be religious interference, which has been one of the main concerns, as I've heard over the years in this decision, that absolutely is clear and transparent. A good article in the Irish Times today saying that the legal experts saying that if you did allow religious interference, you'd be accused of, rightly, of medical negligence. And I think there are legal structures to give reassurance in that regard. Now, the issue about how this hospital operates is a much wider issue about our voluntary health system and voluntary hospital system. All 3 of the maternity hospitals in Dublin are voluntary hospitals, going back in some cases over 200 years, the structures they have. Now, there's a separate debate, separate to the religious issue, as to whether we should be CPOing their hospitals and switching away from a voluntary hospital system. There are arguments in that, but that has not been the debate to date. It's interesting, another article today in the Irish Independent referring to the fact that actually the voluntary hospitals in this regard are the ones that are currently providing the full range of services. It's the public HSE-run hospitals, which currently, not all of them, but the vast majority that aren't, are in that alternative model. Now, this is a complex and difficult issue in terms of the strengths and benefits of voluntary hospitals versus HSE-run hospitals. There are real benefits to our voluntary health system. My view is that central to this should be the national maternity strategy, that actually is the guiding direction. And that gives me real reassurance. Well, that's the one that I think we need to apply, because it recognises that even with the voluntary hospitals, the hospital group CEOs will be ultimately accountable, it says in the national strategy, to the National Director of Acute Hospitals for all services delivered within the maternity network. And I think that's important. That's where the actual direction comes from. And what is that direction? A woman-centred system, a midwife-led system, rather than consultants. Much more care out in the community. That's what we need to be focusing on delivering in St. Vincent's and the Holles Street, as well as the Rotunda, the Coombe, Limerick and every other maternity hospital. That is the guide as to where we should go.
Thank you,
and how the services should be developed and delivered.
You didn't answer my questions with respect. I asked you, why can't the Sisters of Charity in St. Vincent's give this land to the state? Simple as. Why are you, it seems from what you've said, supporting the idea of spending €1 billion of taxpayers' money building a hospital that we all agree is needed on land that is not owned by the state? And do you agree with this statement that I haven't heard a single dissenting voice from anyone who does not believe that the hospital must be in complete public ownership? That should involve not the creation of a lease arrangement, but rather the transfer of ownership of the site to the state, so that there is no uncertainty or lack of clarity on the ownership. And that is your words. That is your words in opposition. The difference is now you have some power to do something about it. It should not involve the creation of a lease ownership, but rather the transfer of ownership of the site to the state, so that there is no uncertainty. You go on to say that the state needs to step up. Well, Eamon Ryan, it is time for you to step up. It is time for you to step up. Your own TDs, Nyasa Hurricane was on the radio yesterday saying that this is an incredibly serious issue. She says it goes to the core of why people voted for the Green Party. So can I ask you, have you abandoned the position that you had, that a lease agreement is not acceptable, doesn't provide the certainty, or have you now rolled over to the tune of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil?
Minister.
The original approach was, I think, agreed, was the Mulvey report back in 2016 in terms of how this would be structured. This government has changed that somewhat. And the lease arrangement, as I said, it was originally 140 years, I think, was it? Now 300 years, at €10 a year. And that, the sister charities, my understanding, were asked, did they want to sell the land? The answer was no from their side. My understanding, they have exited, they have left, or I'd say they're not in the business of healthcare now. And the hospital, the Vincent's Hospital, they have decided, as a voluntary hospital, as is their right, that they want to retain their voluntary hospital status and operate this co-located model. The other government change is change we made is rather than just the Vincent's and the National Maternity Hospital having the board members, there will be 3 additional members, public interest members, as well as the Minister's Golden Chair. So yes, we have changed some aspects of the arrangement. The underlying argument in favour of a co-location service,
Time is up now,
in my
Minister.
mind, remains. There is, for good medical care of women reasons,
Time is up, please.
that to have those ability to go from one ward to the other, from the maternity
Thank you
to the
very
general
much.
hospital.